before the House. I support, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kajwang Moses.
Mr. Speaker, this is a procedural motion, and the best practice for procedural motions usually is for the leader of majority to move and get a member of the other side to second, because I believe that this is a matter that was discussed in the Senate Business Committee. It is a matter that ideally should not be contentious. I know we have been consulting here on whether Standing Order 32 and Standing Order 34 have been violated by this move. And I know that my colleagues will be prosecuting that matter. But in a Senate where we have spent more time fighting than finding common ground, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage the majority leader that on such procedural matters that we can have some bipartisanship so that you can have both sides speaking to it. Mr. Speaker, the debate that prompted this amendment to the Senate calendar was rancorous and was contentious. We had our say, the majority had their way. And what we said about the intent of getting cabinet secretaries to this House, Mr. Speaker, has gone on record. It is in the Hansard, and I don't think this is a motion for us to speak to the issues that we already prosecuted while debating the report of the Rules and Procedure Committee. Mr. Speaker, this is quite unavoidable since last week that resolution was carried. But it's going to have some impact on some of the busy committees, especially committees that have scheduled their activities and meetings into the next quarter. And some of those are like the Public Accounts Committee that I chair, the Public Investments Committee, which has a fairly busy schedule. And so, Mr. Speaker, from time to time, we might be seeking the leave of the Speaker to have meetings even when the grilling of cabinet secretaries is going on. Mr. Speaker, last week, I saw something very interesting. The former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, was called before the Rules Committee of the House of Commons. And the Speaker, in a session that lasted 3 hours and 45 minutes, the former Prime Minister, a man who was extremely powerful, a man who was extremely pompous, was reduced to the level of a witness before a committee. And the interesting thing is that being a parliamentary system, the former Prime Minister was appearing before a committee of his peers in the Conservative Party and his other peers from Labour Party. We should know and we should institutionalize that being in the executive does not make you a special animal in this country. Mr. Speaker, we should encourage those people who have had the good favor and the privilege of serving this country in the executive. Yes, they've got access to resources, they've got access to decisions that can enrich, decisions that can impoverish, decisions that can change people's lives. They must remember that those functions that they exercise on behalf of the people of Kenya. And Mr. Speaker, every time we talk about the people of Kenya, we refer to Article 1 of the Constitution. And many a times I've heard people say that that right has been given to me by the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, there are countries without constitutions. The right is not given by the Constitution, the right is given by God. The Constitution is a mere record of that right and the social contract between the led and the leaders. Mr. Speaker, when the cabinet secretaries come to this House, I said it last week, that perhaps they will regret why they came here. Mr. Speaker, I've sat with many members across the divide when interrogating financial accounts from governors. And Mr. Speaker, when the Senate is on one side and the executive is on the other side, what I've seen is excellent bipartisanship. I want to encourage everyone in this House, when a cabinet secretary comes here, do not look at him as Kenya Kwanza. Do not look at him as a man from your tribe. Do not look at him as a friend of yours. Let the Senate be the Senate. And that is why in the editorial of yesterday's newspapers, Mr. Speaker, if you saw the editorial cartoon, parliamentary oversight was depicted as a corpse lying on a slab with many daggers on its back. Mr. Speaker, that tells you the mood of the public as far as the role of this parliament is concerned. Let us use this opportunity for us to rise above parochial and partisan interests. Let us use this opportunity to convince the nation that legislative oversight that was depicted as lying comatose on a slab has been revived, and that this Senate will be that house where, because we are fewer, we are able to make more meaningful questions, we are able to guide conversation, we are able to put the executive to task. Mr. Speaker, there have been many ways, avenues for policy positions to come to this House. Just last week, we approved the budget policy statement. Every year, the President is required to come to Parliament to make an exposition of public policy. And Mr. Speaker, the motion that follows a presidential address is that the Senate to register its thanks to the President for exposition of public policy contained in the presidential address. There has been no shortage of opportunities for public policy to be brought here. We are going to use this chamber, that is assuming no one goes to court and invalidates what we did last week. We are going to use this chamber. So, Speaker, I'm not trying to threaten anybody, but it's going to be a torture chamber for those who have the habit of misusing the instruments of power that they wield. It will be an accountability chamber for those who think that they can hide in their ivory towers and run away from the public. It will be an accountability chamber for those who think that for a senator to see them, they must make an appointment 3 days or 4 days, and then they go there and they're kept waiting for 6 hours. We will meet here, Mr. Speaker, and we will ensure that we squeeze out of them the accountability that Kenyans expect, and we shall ensure that we are not going to have a rogue government that will be running this country from ivory towers, will be running this country from the executive. And some of them, Mr. Speaker, as you know, are people we competed against in the last elections. You work very hard to become a member of the Senate. The person you vanquished becomes a cabinet secretary. And then they're the ones who are lording it over you. You work very hard to become the senator for Meru. And then the person you vanquished becomes a CAS, Mr. Speaker. And then when it comes to order of precedence, the CAS is now more powerful than the senator who defeated him in the last elections. These are things we must fix, Mr. Speaker. And I want to encourage Senator Dr. Boni Khalwale. In the past Parliament, he came up with an order of precedence bill. We must revive that order of precedence so that those people who are political losers out there, and they are still Kenyans, they can get other opportunities, but they cannot lord it over the people who have been selected by the public to represent them here. Mr. Speaker, my final concern, that this House must and can only admit a cabinet secretary who is appointed as per the Constitution and who has been vetted by the National Assembly as required by the Constitution. Let nobody bend the rules to bring in chief administrative secretaries and all sorts of characters to this House. Mr. Speaker, I am supporting this motion on the assumption that the Senate Business Committee has discussed and there has been unanimity on the matter. On that basis, I support.
Thank you, Senator Kajwang. Senator Sigei.